Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, Mysterious Voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I found in my travels. Today it is Poetry Thursday, so I wanted to highlight a poem of interest. And today's poem is all about self-immolation and sending messages. I am referring to The Gift of Fire by Lisel Mueller. For those who don't know, Lisel Mueller is a German-American poet who wrote since the 1960s and died pretty recently, I believe. They wrote a number of books of poetry, and they also won a number of prestigious awards, including the Pulitzer Prize, which is pretty significant. And some of their poetry might be influenced by the fact that their parents escaped Nazi Germany. After leaving Germany, they went to Italy, which probably wasn't that much better, given the fascists there as well, and then they fled to America. And later on in her life, Lisel began writing poetry, and it's pretty interesting poetry, somewhat political, but she talks about other things as well. So very intrigued to have found her work. I might talk about some other poems of hers down the road. But without further ado, let's talk about The Gift of Fire. I will read it, do a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. The Gift of Fire. In memory of Norman Morrison, who burned himself to death in front of the Pentagon on November 2nd, 1965. In a time of damnation when the world needed a savior, when the dead gathered routinely, comic strip flat and blurred, he took the god at his promise and set himself on fire, skin, brain, sex, smile. So we should really see by that unbearable light, the flower of the single face, the intricate moth of consciousness. But he lived in the land of the one-eyed, where the blind is king. In terms of analysis, that was The Gift of Fire. There's a little bit worth talking about in this poem. In terms of narrative, it seems to talk about how Norman was sending a message in his actions, very similar to how other people have self-immolated throughout history. There were the Vietnamese monks, I believe they were, the Vietnamese monks who burned themselves to protest, I believe it was South Vietnam's actions during the Civil War between North and South Vietnam. And even in this current moment, we have people self-immolating in front of the Supreme Court to protest climate change, as well as the genocide taking place in Gaza, and many other instances of self-immolation. It seems like that seems to be the idea of the poem. Unfortunately, as we see later in the poem, maybe that message wasn't met. Specifically, like she says that we should really see by that unbearable light the flower of the single face, the intricate moth of consciousness. Like there is some hope there, but unfortunately, as she says in the end, the narrator, but he lived in the land of the one-eyed where the blind is king. So perhaps people were not able to capture the message that Norman was trying to send. We're not trying to understand because they chose to live in ignorance, or because the powers that be kept them ignorant for one reason or another. So it's kind of a sad poem about maybe how people can't really send the message that they hope, or the general public isn't receptive to such inflammatory, pardon the weird joke there, the pun, such inflammatory messages. But I do think there is a line in this poem that captures the atmosphere of the 1960s, as well as in the atmosphere of the current moment, where it says, in a time of damnation when the world needed a savior, when the dead gathered routinely, comics strip flat and blurred. And that makes sense for that time because of all the violence and the civil rights protest at the time, as well as the many imperialist wars going on. But that also applies to the current moment too, with all the school shootings, the political violence that's going on, and many other things. it's really rough, and we do kind of hope for a savior, but I don't think anyone is coming to save us, the frequent thing that's said. I think it is up to the people to save themselves. Maybe that's what Mueller is getting at, or maybe she doesn't see that herself. But I do think it's possible for the people to rise up. We've seen it in certainly many other countries. At the time that I'm talking, Nepal has done it for themselves. Given they are a small country, can it happen for the United States? That remains to be seen. Anyway, those are my thoughts on The Gift of Fire, a pretty good poem that has applications to the world of today that we are living in, especially in America. If you have any thoughts on the poem, or you simply want to say something about my review here, let me know in the comments below. Would love to hear from you. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this poet, or this poem, or even Poetry Thursday if you want to talk about some poetry of interest to yourself. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and fire-based travels. Farewell.